He searched every room. The nursery? Empty. The kitchen? Empty. The entire mansion, silent. No sign of his maid, no sign of his baby. His heart started to race. Kevin Grant had built empires, moved markets, and controlled everything in his world, except this moment. Then he stepped outside, and what he saw stopped him cold. There, on a stone bench, in the biting morning air, was Gloria, asleep, still in uniform, arms wrapped tightly around baby Emily. A faded blue blanket covered the child, and Gloria's yellow cleaning gloves were still clinging to her hands. Neither of them stirred. For a second he couldn't breathe. Then he saw Emily's tiny chest rise, her fingers curled into Gloria's apron, and on Gloria's face a quiet kind of peace. He didn't understand it. Not yet. But what looked like recklessness was something else entirely, and that moment changed everything. The sky hadn't turned yet. It was still dark in Manhattan. Street lamps flickered against stone buildings, and the wind carried that early-hour stillness, the kind that makes you feel every second of silence. Kevin Grant stood on the marble steps of his estate, barefoot, tense. The cold bit at his skin. But it wasn't the cold that made him shiver. It was the emptiness. He had already checked the nursery. No baby. He'd called the nanny. No answer. Walked every hallway. But the one person who always kept things running, Gloria, his quiet, invisible maid, was nowhere to be found. Then, a flicker of movement near the garden. He stepped off the porch, heart pounding, breath shallow. It wasn't supposed to be like this, not in his house, not in his world. And then he saw her. Gloria, curled up on the garden bench, back leaned against the cold stone, eyes closed, breathing steady. In her arms, Emily. The baby was wrapped in an old blanket, tucked so closely into Gloria's chest it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. Kevin froze. The yellow gloves were still on Gloria's hands, her head tilted back, her arm locked around the child like instinct, like protection. He took a step closer. No words, no reaction. Emily's fingers clung to Gloria's uniform, her tiny face nestled into the space just below Gloria's chin. Safe. Too safe for this to be an accident. Kevin didn't know why, he didn't know how. But he knew one thing, this wasn't neglect, it was love. Not the kind you buy, the kind you carry, even when it breaks you. And in that still, cold moment, everything Kevin believed about love, family, and what it means to protect something began to crack. But before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. I hope this story makes you believe that sometimes the people we overlook are the ones holding our world together. The air hung thick with silence, not peace, not calm, just that heavy kind of stillness you feel when something's not right. Kevin stood frozen beside the garden path, his breath caught halfway between fear and disbelief. Gloria didn't stir. Neither did the baby. He stepped closer. Slowly. The gravel crunched beneath his bare feet. The closer he got, the stranger it all felt. The bench was damp with morning frost. The blanket barely covered Emily's legs. And Gloria. She looked like she hadn't meant to sleep, just hadn't had the strength to stay awake. Her arms were still wrapped around the baby, one yellow-gloved hand tucked under Emily's back, the other across her tiny chest, as if shielding her from the wind. Kevin's mind raced. Why was his daughter out here? Why didn't anyone wake him? Where was the stuff? Why didn't she knock on his door? But none of those questions made it past his lips, because in that moment, all he could see was the way Emily's small body rose and fell gently against Gloria's. Safe. He crouched beside them, carefully. His hand hovered near the child's back, unsure whether to lift her or let her stay. Gloria's eyes fluttered. She blinked, dazed, then saw him. She jolted upright, panic flashing across her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered, breathless. He held up a hand, not in anger, just confusion. "Why?" That was all he could manage. Gloria looked down at Emily, then back at him. Her voice cracked. "She was cold, sir. The heat, it stopped working. She cried for hours. I didn't know what else to do." She didn't defend herself. She didn't explain beyond that. She just said it. And Kevin, who had always believed every problem had a solution, every mistake a price, felt something inside him shift. Gloria wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't even trying to be forgiven. She was just tired. Tired in a way no amount of sleep could fix. He looked at her one last time, really looked, at the circles under her eyes, at the trembling in her arms, at the way she hadn't let go of Emily, even in sleep. And for the first time in a very long time, he didn't feel rich, not at all. Kevin stood there, unmoving. The wind had picked up, brushing past the marble columns behind him, but his eyes stayed fixed on the yellow glove still resting against his daughter's back, and on the quiet woman who had been invisible in his home until this very moment. Gloria didn't look up again. She just sat there silent, arms still wrapped around Emily, like a mother clinging to something she couldn't afford to lose twice. Kevin swallowed hard. He didn't know what emotion was hitting him. Guilt, shock, or something far less familiar. All he knew was that he didn't want to raise his voice. Not here. Not now. He stepped back. Gently. His hand brushed across the top of the blanket, just enough to feel the warmth still trapped inside it. It wasn't much, but it had been enough to keep his child safe. And the gloves, still on Gloria's hands, bright yellow, a little torn at the fingertips, smudged with polish and dust. She hadn't even taken them off. Kevin's mind went back to the night before, the text from the staff group chat he hadn't answered, the subtle drop in the thermostat reading he'd dismissed. He remembered walking past the nursery door on his way out, hearing Emily cry and thinking she'd settle soon. He hadn't stopped. He hadn't checked. Now he was here, outside, barefoot, standing beside a bench in the freezing dark, watching the woman he paid to clean his house cradle the only thing in his life that ever truly mattered. Gloria finally spoke again. Her voice was barely a whisper. I didn't want her to cry anymore. She kept her eyes on the child. Not once did she ask for understanding. Not once did she explain herself with pride. She just sat there still, as if ready for whatever judgment would come next. Kevin took a breath, the kind that shakes a little on the way out. I didn't know the heat broke. Gloria nodded slowly. I called maintenance. No one came. A pause. You were at the gala. He didn't remember much about the fundraiser, only that the champagne had been warm and the conversations colder. I was going to rock her, Gloria said, just until she settled. Just for a few minutes. Her voice broke. I didn't mean to fall asleep. Kevin looked down at the child in her arms, now stirring softly, eyelids fluttering. He didn't have words for what he felt, only questions. And most of them weren't for her. They were for himself. He didn't ask her to stand, didn't tell her to explain. He just said quietly, "Come inside." She hesitated. Her arms tightened around the baby, as if part of her believed this was the last time she'd be allowed to hold her. But Kevin didn't reach. He didn't rush. He simply turned and led the way, leaving the front door wide open behind him. She followed. The marble floors felt colder than the bench. The silence inside the house, deeper than it had been outside. Kevin gestured to a seat in the kitchen, not the servants' table tucked behind the pantry, the main one. He didn't sit at first. He just watched as Gloria gently lowered Emily into the bassinet beside the counter, brushing the blanket into place like it was made of gold. Then she sat, still wearing the gloves. She kept her hands folded in her lap. Didn't speak. Didn't blink. Kevin pulled out the chair across from her and finally asked, "Who taught you how to hold a child like that?" A long pause, then she answered, "My daughter." His body stilled. She wasn't looking at him. She was staring at a small crack in the tile. Her voice was even, but quiet. Too quiet. "Her name was Ava," she said. "She was 2. Kevin didn't move, not even to breathe. "She got sick one winter," Gloria continued. "We didn't have heat. Couldn't afford to keep it running all night. I bundled her up best I could. She pressed her hands together until her knuckles went white. She had a fever. I tried to bring it down. Wet towels, cold rags. I stayed up holding her, just like I held Emily tonight. I prayed she'd make it to morning. Her throat tightened. But when I woke up, she was gone. She looked up then just once, and Kevin saw it. The grief she carried like breath. I failed her. 3 words. That's all. But they landed harder than anything he'd heard in years. And since that day, she whispered, I told myself like if I ever held another child, I wouldn't let go, not for anything, not even sleep. Silence filled the room again, except this time, it was sacred. Kevin glanced at the bassinet. Emily was still sleeping, and he realized something that pulled at a part of him he didn't know existed. This woman hadn't just saved his child. She was still trying to save her own. He didn't speak for a long time, not because he didn't have words, but because none of them felt worthy. Gloria sat still across the table, eyes lowered, hands folded, gloves still on. The same gloves she wore to scrub the marble floors, the same hands that had held his baby like something irreplaceable. Kevin stood quietly and walked to the edge of the room. He didn't know why. Maybe to breathe, maybe to hide the sting behind his eyes. He'd never asked about her life, never wondered where she went after hours, never noticed when she skipped breaks or stayed late. She was just there, like the furniture, like the silence. But that morning something shifted. He found himself watching her. Later that day, as the sun pushed through the kitchen windows, he passed by the nursery door and paused. Gloria was inside, holding Emily again. Not because she had to, she had already worked through the night, but because Emily reached for her. Her small hands gripped Gloria's collar like instinct, like trust. Gloria rocked gently in the chair by the window, humming low, brushing her fingers across the baby's cheek with the kind of care you can't fake. The kind that doesn't clock out. Kevin didn't go in. He just watched. He watched her fold baby clothes on the floor, one tiny sock at a time. Watched her pick up dropped toys with a patience no one taught her. Watched her rub circles on Emily's back until the child melted into her chest like she belonged there. That night he checked the time cards. Gloria hadn't taken a single day off in almost 7 months. No complaints, no requests. She just showed up, did her job, and somewhere in the cracks of routine, gave his daughter the one thing he hadn't: presence. He thought about the baby's first laugh. He hadn't been home. The first time she crawled. He'd seen it on a nanny cam. But Gloria, she was there. Always there. And for the first time in his life, Kevin Grant, who had built a life on strategy, data, and distance, felt completely, uncomfortably close. Not to failure, but to truth, because the woman he'd barely noticed had been holding his daughter's heart in her hands all along, and somewhere deep inside, he wondered how many more moments he had missed, because he hadn't known what love really looked like. The house was warmer now, not because of the heat, because Kevin had started noticing things. He walked slower through the halls, listened more during breakfast, found himself standing outside the nursery door more often than he used to. But while something in him was softening, not everyone in the house saw it that way. They saw Gloria, and they whispered, "She's too close to the child." Crossing lines. "She's the maid, not the mother." The words floated through the kitchen, folded into side glances, and carried by voices that never said anything to her face. But Gloria heard them. She always heard them. She moved a little quieter after that. Took longer to knock before entering rooms. Avoided eye contact when she handed Emily over. One afternoon, Kevin's sister stopped by. She was holding a glass of wine, eyes sharp. "You trust her too much," she said casually, like it was an observation, not an accusation. "She sleeps in staff quarters. She works all hours. You're blurring lines, Kevin." He didn't respond right away, because deep down, he knew it wasn't lines that were being blurred. It was something deeper than rules, something no policy could explain. That night, Gloria stayed later than usual. Emily had a fever, mild. But Gloria didn't leave her side. When the baby finally drifted off, Gloria slipped out of the room, quiet as ever. She walked down the hall, past the kitchen, and stopped, because there it was again, her name, spoken in a tone that wasn't kind. She thinks she belongs here. She's trying to be something she's not. Gloria didn't cry. She didn't go back to her quarters. She went to the laundry room, sat on the wooden bench near the dryer, hands folded, heart heavy. The next morning, Kevin found a note on the kitchen counter. It wasn't long. Just a thank you, a goodbye, and a quiet promise that she didn't want to cause trouble. Her small suitcase was already packed by the door. She didn't want to be talked about, didn't want to be a burden, didn't want to stay where she wasn't wanted. But before she could reach the gate, Kevin was already waiting, Emily in his arms. No words at first, just the wind between them. Then, softly, "You don't leave the place you belong." He stepped closer, placing the baby gently back in Gloria's arms. "You're not just her nanny," his voice broke. "You're her heart." The house was asleep. For once there were no whispers, no questions, no lines being drawn in quiet corners. Gloria was still awake. She always was. She sat beside the crib, watching Emily breathe. One soft rise, one soft fall. The fever from the day before had passed, or so they thought. But then, a sound, not a cry, not a whimper, just silence. Too long, too still. Gloria leaned over the crib, her breaths short, labored, her tiny hands twitching beneath the blanket. Panic hit fast, but Gloria didn't scream. She lifted the baby gently into her arms and held her close. Kevin was already on his way. Something in him had pulled him from sleep. He turned the hallway corner just as Gloria opened the nursery door. He saw her face first, and then the baby. "Call a doctor," she said, voice shaking. He didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate. Within 20 minutes the nursery was full. Machines, wires, cold voices, urgent orders. Kevin stood near the window, helpless. Money moved fast, but not fast enough. Nothing was working. The fever climbed. Emily's skin turned pale. Her breath slowed again. Kevin looked at the doctor, and in that brief second of eye contact, he saw fear, real fear. And then Gloria stepped forward. She didn't ask. She didn't wait. She reached for Emily. At first the nurse protested, but Kevin nodded. Let her. Gloria sat in the rocking chair, the same one by the window where she always sang. She held the baby tight against her chest, like that first night on the bench. Her voice cracked as she began to hum. Not a lullaby from a children's book, but a hymn. Old, southern, barely above a whisper. The same one she used to sing to Ava. Tears slid down her face onto Emily's tiny hands. Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. She rocked and sang and prayed without words. Kevin stood across the room, frozen. The machines kept beeping. But something changed. Emily's chest began to rise a little steadier. Her skin flushed with warmth again. Her tiny fingers gripped the edge of Gloria's blouse. The fever so began to break. The doctor didn't speak. No one did. There was nothing to say. Because what had saved that child wasn't found in medicine or money. It was in the arms of a woman who had already lost everything once and refused to lose it again. The next evening the dining room was full. Long table, crystal glasses, heavy silverware. Kevin rarely called family dinners, and never with the staff present. But tonight, everyone was there. His sister, his mother, his chief of staff, the housekeeper, the butler, and at the far end, Gloria, still in uniform, still unsure why she was seated among them. She sat with her hands in her lap, shoulders pulled in, as if she might vanish if no one looked directly at her. Kevin stood at the head of the table, silent. For a long time, no one spoke. Then, his voice cut through the air, low, steady. "Last night, My daughter almost died. Fawkes froze. Eyes turned. But she didn't, he continued. And not because of doctors, or machines, or anything I paid for. He looked at Gloria. She lived because someone loved her enough to hold her through it. The room shifted. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else stared at their plate. Gloria didn't move. She held Emily, Kevin said. When I couldn't. He paused. I was busy. With business. With events. With everything I thought made me important. He looked around the table. But this woman, his voice cracked slightly, held the one thing that truly mattered. And she did it not because it was her job, but because she loved her. A gasp. Somewhere near the middle of the table. But Kevin kept going. She wrapped my child in her arms and risked her own health to keep her warm. She stayed awake for nights. She listened when she cried. She sang to her, prayed over her. And his eyes returned to Gloria. Then he did something none of them expected. He walked to her side and knelt. Right there, beside the maid. The marble floor didn't matter. The room full of eyes didn't matter. He looked up at her, voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for saving my daughter. A pause. And for teaching me what it actually means to be a father. Gloria's lips parted, but no words came. Only tears. She shook her head, unsure what to do, how to respond. But Kevin wasn't waiting for approval. He turned back to the table. She's not just the help, he said firmly. She's family. The room sat still. No one objected. No one dared. Because in that moment, even the ones who used to whisper finally saw her. The mansion felt different now. Not louder, not busier, just warmer. The silence that once echoed off marble floors was slowly being replaced by humming in the kitchen, by soft baby laughter, by the quiet rhythm of love settling into a place it had never been allowed to live. Kevin started working from home more, not because he had less to do, but because he had something worth staying for. He watched the little moments now, the ones he used to walk past, like the way Emily giggled when Gloria kissed her nose, the way Gloria tucked her into naps with the kind of gentleness that couldn't be taught, the way Emily reached for her in the mornings before she reached for anyone else. One morning Kevin stepped into the nursery, holding something in his hand. Small, gold. Gloria was rocking Emily, whispering the tail end of a lullaby. She looked up as he entered. Not startled, just curious. He walked over and handed her the box. I don't want this to feel like a gift, he said softly, because it's not about thanks. Gloria looked down. Inside the box, a delicate gold necklace, a tiny heart hanging at the center. She blinked. I can't accept this, she said, her voice already trembling. You don't have to, he replied, but I hope you will. She held the chain in her palm, eyes fixed on the heart. For the woman, Kevin said, who kept mine beating. She tried to speak, but her voice caught somewhere between shock and tears. I don't need anything, she whispered. Kevin smiled gently. I know. That's why you deserve everything. He helped her clasp it around her neck. Nothing else was said. There didn't need to be. Later that afternoon, Emily took her first wobbly steps across the nursery rug. Gloria clapped quietly, kneeling to catch her. The toddler fell into her arms, laughing. Mama G! It was the first time she said it. Clear, unprompted, as if she'd always known the words. Gloria froze. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't cry. She just held the child close and let herself breathe. For the first time in years, not like someone passing through, not like help, but like someone who belonged. And behind her, standing in the doorway. Kevin didn't say a word. He just smiled, because for the first time, his house felt like a home. Years passed, the seasons changed outside the gates, but inside the home, something sacred remained. Emily grew quickly, a little taller each spring, a little braver each fall. She scraped knees in the courtyard, painted handprints on hallway walls, learned to tie her shoes in the laundry room where Gloria used to hum lullabies. And Gloria. She stayed, through bedtime stories and school uniforms, through first words, first fevers, first questions about the world. She never asked for more. She just showed up, day after day. Heart open, arms
They called her
steady.
Mama
G without needing to explain why. Even the staff followed suit. And Kevin, he no longer walked through the halls with phone in hand. He knew now that the most important things couldn't be scheduled. They had to be witnessed. He sat in the garden more often now, beside the old stone bench, the one he once found too cold to notice. Now, it was sacred. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Emily, now 7, sat beside Gloria on that very bench. Her legs dangled. Her voice carried stories of school and friends and playground drama. Gloria smiled, her hands folded softly in her lap. The golden necklace still rested against her chest, worn now, but never removed. Kevin watched from the balcony, arms crossed gently, eyes a little misty. He knew this chapter of their lives was growing shorter. Gloria had started to slow down. She no longer cleaned, didn't have to. Her presence was no longer tied to duty. It was woven into the walls, into every photo, every corner, every memory that mattered. One morning, Emily was asked at school, "Who raised you?" She didn't hesitate. "My dad," she said, "and my Mama G." Simple. True. Unshaken. That evening, Emily climbed into Gloria's lap with a book she could now read herself, but she still asked Gloria to turn the pages, because some things aren't about need. They're about love and staying close. Outside, the garden lights flickered on, and for a moment, the house, once echoing with emptiness, felt full of stories, of second chances, of hearts that never stopped holding on. Kevin stepped out onto the balcony, looking down at them, and in a voice low, meant for no one but memory, he whispered, "I used to think love was something you earned." He paused. "But the woman who had the least gave us the most." A breath. "And we'll never forget that."